Welcome to the debate. Look around you. The smartphone resting in your hand, the spreadsheet illuminating your screen.
The standardized tests we give to our kids?
Right, exactly. We fundamentally believe that these tools provide us with a perfect, high-resolution picture of reality.
We measure, therefore we know.
Yeah. But what if these instruments are actually blinding us? What if our modern obsession with, measuring the world is the exact reason we no longer truly understand it? Today, we are stepping into an immense, honestly, labyrinthine metaphysical framework that attempts to diagnose this exact crisis of modern understanding.
We are focusing squarely on the foundational text, Science Seems in Seams, authored by Saeed M. Rahman.
It is nothing less than a grand unification of applied linguistics, Islamic metaphysics, phenomenology, and, the terrifying frontiers of artificial intelligence.
It truly is a staggering piece of intellectual architecture. Rahman is attempting to completely remap how we observe reality, how we use language, and how we interact with the unknown. He doesn't just want to change our methods. He wants to dismantle the very way we define the human mind.
And that brings us to the core question we will be tearing apart today. Is Rahman's Mizanic, meaning balanced, theory of mediation, which radically subordinates human perception, scientific inquiry, and language to what he calls an absolute prior, a necessary ethical corrective to our modern intellectual hubris?
Or, conversely, does its incredibly severe epistemology of negation paralyze grounded human agency and the scientific inquiry we actually need to survive?
I'll be taking the advocate position today, arguing that Rahman's framework brilliantly dismantles the idols of total explanation, offering a rigorous and necessary restoration of our epistemic humility.
And I'll be taking the dissenter position, arguing that while Rahman's metaphysical architecture is breathtaking, his demands to constantly decenter the human eye and treat science as merely a seam reader run the profound risk of collapsing the functional bridges we rely on to navigate and survive reality.
So, just to lay out my position clearly, before we really get into the weeds here, I argue that modernity is suffering from what Rahman terms ontological overreach.
Which is a great phrase, I have to admit.
It is, because we have made a catastrophic systemic error in mistaking the instrument of observation for the origin of truth.
Right.
We look at a brain scan and think we have captured a thought. We look at a test score and think we have, captured a student's potential. Rahman introduces this radical concept of the human eye, the self, not as a generator of truth, but as a mere aperture, and he frames science as a seam reader.
Which sounds quite dismissive on the surface.
It does, but I submit that this is not a dismissal or degradation of the human intellect. Rather, it is its salvation. By recognizing our absolute limits, by refusing to equate our measurements with total mastery over a subject, we actively avoid the bureaucratic violence of instrumentalism. We protect the sanctity of the human subject from being reduced to a mere data point on a corporate or educational spreadsheet. Rahman is essentially saving us from our own tools.
Okay, well, I approach this from a fundamentally different angle. I anchor my perspective in intellectual humility as well. I don't think any serious scientist believes we possess absolute truth, but I must vehemently defend the necessity of structure.
Okay, go on.
Rahman's framework demands an almost impossible state of perpetual what he calls disciplined non-understanding. He defines human consciousness primarily as a passive locus, an empty space for divine disclosure, and he dismisses empirical science as being blind to the whole cloth of reality.
I don't know if he dismisses it entirely.
Well, my position is that this worldview absolutely risks a dangerous kind of epistemological fatalism. If we are just apertures, if we must perpetually negate our own concepts and, sit in the dark waiting for absolute truth to strike us, human beings lose the authority to claim objective, operational truths about their world.
But do we really need that ultimate authority?
Yes, we need those structural truths, however provisional or imperfect they may be, to cure diseases, to build societies, and survive.
Let's start right there, actually. At the very bedrock of his paper, the concept of the I as an aperture.
The I meaning EYE or eyes in the self?
Both, actually. He plays with that duality a lot. Rahman points out something so ubiquitous we never notice it.
The very grammar of ordinary human speech gives the self an unearned throne. We walk around all day saying, I think, I see, I mean, I choose.
We treat the I as the absolute origin point of reality.
Exactly. But Raman argues the I does not create the light by which it sees. It doesn't generate the metaphysical field in which it thinks. It is merely an aperture, a window, a place of passage.
Right.
And I view this as a profound ethical relocation of responsibility. Under this framework, we are answerable for our reception of reality, not its creation.
You're contrasting this with the ego, then?
Yeah, the modern concept of the nafs, the ego, which frantically tries to manufacture its own destiny and masquerade as the source of its own light.
Look, that framing is poetic, but I have to ask you to consider the functional, the practical psychological reality of living that way.
What do you mean?
Let's say you wake up every morning and remind yourself of its consigned nothingness, as he puts it, that you are just a hole through which light passes.
Yeah.
How does one maintain psychological agency? Experiencing the world from a localized subjective center, this I isn't necessarily a wicked illusion or an idol that needs to be smashed with a hammer.
He doesn't say it needs to be smashed, just recognized for what it is.
But it is an evolutionary and structural necessity for surviving the physical world, what Islamic metaphysics calls the dunya. If I don't believe my I has agency, if I don't believe I am the one generating my choices, why should I act ethically?
Because your agency.
Why should I fight against injustice if I am just an empty window?
Well, because your agency isn't destroyed, it is just relocated to the act of witnessing. Think about the analogy of a camera lens. If we treat the camera lens as the source of the landscape, we completely misunderstand the entire art of photography.
Right, the lens doesn't make the mountain.
Exactly. Now, you might ask, if we are merely apertures, how do we explain the distinct, unique flavor of human genius or creativity or moral courage?
Right, why are we all so different if we're just empty tubes?
Raman's answer is that the human being is a high-fidelity receiver, not a blank slate. We each have a specific, unique curvature to our lens. The art, the genius, the ethics, they all come from how meticulously we polish that lens to receive the necessary prior, the absolute reality, without distorting it with the smudges of our own ego.
So ethical action is just the act of keeping the lens clean.
Yes.
I understand the poetry of the camera lens. It's a beautiful metaphor. But let's push this into the terrifying territory Raman himself forces us into, which is artificial intelligence.
Oh, right.
He spends a significant portion of this paper critiquing AI as a processive simulacrum. He calls it a mirror without a soul. He says it is grammar without breath.
That is one of my favorite lines in the paper, actually.
It's a great line. Now, if human beings are also just conduits or apertures for this necessary prior, if we're just lenses passing light from one side to the other, the boundary between human and machine becomes dangerously uncomfortably thin in practical observation.
I'm not sure I follow that leap.
Think about it. An AI takes an input, processes it through a vast dimensional space of parameters, and outputs a response.
Right.
If a human just takes an input from the divine and outputs a response based on the curvature of their lens, functionally, aren't we just a biological version of his processive simulacrum? How are we any different from a highly advanced neural network?
I am not convinced by that conflation because Rahman explicitly guards against it with one of the most fascinating concepts in the paper, which is the quantum snap.
Ah, the quantum snap.
Yes, this is the exact mechanism that separates the human from the machine. The quantum snap is the sudden, irreducible moment of covenantal recognition.
Explain how that actually works, though. What exactly is snapping?
It's a resonance frequency. Raman roots this in the Islamic concept of the mithaq, the primordial covenant where every human soul supposedly answered and recognized God before physical time even began.
Before time began.
Right, so the soul already possesses this primordial memory. When a human being encounters a profound truth in the physical world, the external truth doesn't just deposit data into a hard drive. It collides with that internal primordial memory.
It vibrates at the exact same frequency.
Exactly. That collision creates a spark, the quantum snap. It's the moment you recognize a truth not just as a verifiable fact, but as a moral obligation.
A moral obligation.
Yeah. An AI can simulate the grammar of a soul perfectly. It can output a beautifully empathetic paragraph about human suffering that might even make you cry. But it has no inward stake. It doesn't possess the breath, the nafas, which precedes the word.
Right.
The human witness experiences the sudden, terrifying realization that they are answerable to the truth they just received. A machine never experiences answerability.
Okay, I will concede the theological elegance of the quantum snap. It gives the human a distinct metaphysical weight that a server farm inherently lacks. But I still have a massive problem with the day-to-day application of this theory.
Like pragmatically speaking?
Exactly. If I am sitting in a laboratory, or if I am an administrator observing a classroom, I cannot empirically verify a quantum snap. I cannot measure a soul's resonance. I can only verify output.
Sure.
I can only measure what happens in the physical space. Which leads directly to the title of his work, Science Seems in Seems.
Yes, it's a brilliant framing of the scientific method.
It is highly clever wordplay, sure, but he argues that science is only a noble seam reader. It attends to variables, measurements, the boundaries between things, the seams of reality. And he claims science falls into idolatry, or what we call scientism, when it arrogantly claims the seam is the entire fabric.
Exactly. Science isolates in order to measure. That is its dignity. And Rahman doesn't deny that. But it cannot explain why the universe is intelligible in the first place.
That's a philosophical question, though, not a scientific one.
But it matters. Think about it. Why does mathematics work? Why does the physical universe perfectly map onto abstract human logic? Why is existence present for inquiry rather than just being an infinite silent void?
Because if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here to ask the question.
That's a cop-out, though. Science sees the boundary between a cell wall and a virus. It sees the seam. But it cannot turn its microscopes toward the seamless one, the absolute prior, because God is not a measurable bounded item within the created field. When science forgets this limitation, it builds a false altar out of its own useful precision.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that treating science as the whole cloth of our operational reality is inherently arrogant or idolatrous. I come at this from a strictly pragmatic standpoint.
But pragmatism is exactly the issue.
Let me finish. The seams, the measurable, empirical relations between things, the laws of physics, the mechanics of cellular biology, the tensile strength of steel, these might be the only verifiable fabric we actually have shared access to.
Shared, yes, but not total.
By insisting that there is a seamless one behind the scenes that science is inherently blind to, Rahman is imposing a massive, unprovable theological demand on a system designed strictly for material utility.
He's not demanding science prove it, he's demanding science recognize its own blindness to it.
But he is demoting empirical inquiry. He's saying that people actually curing diseases and building bridges are missing the real reality.
He isn't demoting it at all, he is placing it in its proper proportion. Remember, he calls it a mesonic theory, a theory of balance. Let's ground this.
Ground it, please.
If someone is listening to this on their commute right now, they might be thinking, this is incredibly abstract. What does this have to do with my 9-to-5 job or my kid's school?
Right, what does it have to do with applied linguistics?
Exactly. Let's look at how Rahman applies this to his own field, where he introduces the problem of protocol. When educational institutions rely purely on 40-page rubrics with 7 different tiers of proficiency to measure a student, they are acting as seam readers who think they hold the whole cloth. And when they do that, they commit administrative violence.
Okay, administrative violence is a very strong term for a grading rubric.
But it is violence. They mistake the measurement of the linguistic seam for the living, breathing reality of the learner. A teacher looks at a perfectly articulated sentence and checks a box. They look at a grammatical error and diagnose a deficit.
Because that's what they're paid to do.
But the rubric completely misses the human labor, the background trauma, the structural constraints, the silent cognitive leaps the student is fighting through. The rubric assumes the data is the person. That is the danger of instrumentalism.
Look, I acknowledge the danger of institutional blindness. We have all seen standardized testing absolutely crush the spirit of a vibrant student. But let me ask you the structural question.
Okay.
If we abandon the rubric for what Rahman calls the Shahīd, the witnessing posture, how do we functionally run a society?
The Shahīd posture doesn't mean you don't evaluate.
It demands that we stand in asymmetrical vulnerability with the learner, refusing to prematurely categorize them, holding space for their unique soul. That is a beautiful, profound ethic for a one-on-one mentor. I wish every child had a mentor like that.
Right.
But you cannot scale the Shahīd posture to a public school district of 50,000 students. Protocols, rubrics, and measurements, the seams, are the only way we manage large-scale human systems equitably.
Equitably?
Yes.
Without them, you don't get profound witnessing, you get subjective bias, you get favoritism, and systemic chaos. You need the bureaucracy to ensure fairness.
That's a fair structural concern, I'll give you that, though I would frame the solution very differently. Rahman isn't an anarchist saying, burn the rubrics and close the schools.
Well, he gets pretty close sometimes.
He is saying, do not let the rubric become your ontology. Do not let the tool become your God. The necessity of administration does not make it innocent. When the rubric becomes the only lens you use to understand human beings, you destroy the phenomenon you are trying to observe.
You killed the butterfly to pin it to the corkboard.
Exactly. And this institutional obsession with measurement over presence ties directly into his diagnosis of our modern era, which he calls the post-Dhicker condition.
Yes, this is where his cultural critique gets incredibly sharp, though I have serious reservations about how broadly he applies it.
Let's unpack the premise first, just to be clear. Dhikr, in Islamic theology, literally means remembrance or invocation, usually of God. But Rahman applies it universally. We really need to bridge this Islamic metaphysics to universal human psychology here.
Right.
Rahman is basically saying that humans have an inescapable operating system. We are structured to orbit around a central defining value. We are fundamentally worshiping beings.
Even secular humans?
Especially secular humans. He argues that modern secular humans haven't stopped doing dhikr. We haven't stopped remembering and worshiping. We have simply displaced the object of our worship.
To what exactly?
We repeat and invoke moods, corporate brands, political grievances, productivity metrics, and our own digital reflections on social media. We rehearse our pain, and we chant our ideological slogans. In the modern world, our worship is absolutely crowded with displaced, counterfeit objects.
Here is where I have to challenge the core premise. I seriously question whether all repetition and all behavioral patterns carry the heavy ontological weight of worship.
Why wouldn't they?
Because I think Rahman might be over-symbolizing basic human psychological habits and neurochemistry.
Just boiling it down to chemicals?
Checking a smartphone, subscribing to a political ideology, or, tracking your daily steps on a smartwatch isn't necessarily a subconscious attempt to replace God or find a cosmic center.
I think it often is.
It might just be social conditioning. It's dopamine. It's the basic functioning of a social primate navigating a very high information environment. Calling a productivity metric a displaced idol feels like a massive category error.
But is it a category error? When those metrics begin to entirely dictate human worth. When a person's entire sense of justification, peace, and identity relies on their economic output or their social media engagement, that is the exact definition of an idol. It is something finite that you ask to bear the weight of the infinite.
I think people just want to keep their jobs, honestly.
And to support how deeply entrenched this idolatry is, Rahman introduces a critical concept, Qamar of Qamar, or second-order concealment.
Right. The intoxicant of the intoxicant.
Precisely. Qamar is a veil or an intoxicant that clouds the intellect. It's regular ignorance or drunkenness. But Qamar of Qamar is the concealment of the concealment.
Meaning you don't even know you're drunk.
Exactly. It is a highly sophisticated lie designed to make you believe you are experiencing ultimate clarity. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Think about a hospital administrator's dashboard predicting patient wait times.
Okay.
The algorithm perfectly measures data. The dashboard shows all green lights. The administrators look at it and think they have perfect clarity on the efficiency of their hospital.
Right, because the metrics are good.
But the algorithm only shows green because the hospital implemented a triage system that systematically turns away complex uninsured cases. The data looks perfect,
but it completely obscures the actual human suffering of the people pushed out the door.
Yeah.
The administrators think they have absolute sight, but the instrument itself is actively blinding them to reality. That is second-order concealment. Modern complexity is often just a pattern of control designed to pacify us into thinking we know what's going on.
Look, I see the rhetorical force of Kamar, I really do. The hospital example perfectly describes the hubris of the modern technocrat. We mistake the map for the territory all the time.
All the time.
But we have to be incredibly careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Complex bureaucracies and massive data sets aren't always veils of ignorance. They are often genuine, life-saving tools of discovery.
I'm not denying they can be useful.
But we cured polio, we mapped the human genome, we tracked the spread of global pandemics through highly complex, segmented instrumental protocols. If we train people to treat all modern complexity and measurement as a veil over ignorance, we risk falling into a dangerous kind of neo-Luddism or romantic anti-intellectualism.
That's a bit extreme.
Is it? We need to be able to look at a data set without immediately assuming it is an idol designed to blind us.
I hear that, but Raman wouldn't say the data set is inherently evil. The data is the data. He would say it becomes a veil the exact moment it claims to be the whole truth of the human condition.
Which, admittedly, happens too often.
And this brings us to how we actually articulate truth, moving from how we perceive reality to how we speak about it. Raman proposes a theory of language called terminal trend alignment.
This is his philosophy of grammar, meaning, and pedagogy.
Yes, he argues that grammar is not the metaphysical root of truth. It is merely the crossing, the bridge. Imagine a student in an English as a second language classroom.
Okay.
The student is trying to explain a complex, deeply felt experience of systemic injustice in their home country. Their English grammar is completely broken. They use the wrong verb tenses, they mix up their pronouns.
Right.
By institutional standards, the sentence is a failure. But Raman argues that the meaning vector, the trend of their thought, is entirely honest and moving toward a terminal of profound truth. Language in this view is bayan, which means clarification or disclosure.
It is not possession.
Right, it is not possession. Therefore, as witnesses, as teachers, we must honor what he calls the sanctity of the pause.
I do love that phrase.
It's beautiful. That is the space of disciplined non-understanding where the learner is holding two semantic fields that don't cleanly align, trying to build the bridge. The seam reader teacher fails the student for the wrong verb. The Shahīd teacher hears the vector pointing toward truth and waits.
The sanctity of the pause is a beautiful pedagogical concept. It really is. It asks the teacher to be patient, to let meaning form, rather than demanding instant regurgitation.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this metaphor of the bridge. If we treat language merely as a temporary bridge or a crossing, what happens when the bridge is built out of fundamentally counterfeit materials?
Well, Raman actually addresses this beautifully with his use of the parable of Al-Samari's calf from the Quran.
Remind me of the details there.
The story goes that while Moses was delayed on the mountain, the people couldn't handle the waiting. They couldn't handle the pause. So Al-Samiri gathered their gold and forged a physical calf for them to worship.
Right, the golden calf.
Yeah. Raman uses this as a metaphor for a counterfeit terminal alignment, a sacred trace, a genuine human impulse for the divine or for truth, was forced into a visible physical form prematurely because the people couldn't endure the delay of meaning.
They couldn't stand the pause.
They couldn't sit in disciplined non-understanding, so they demanded an immediate measurable object. So I would pose this to you. Doesn't our modern educational obsession with standardized testing and immediate verbal output force our students to build golden calves out of their own intellects? We demand they show us a measurable, perfectly grammatical form immediately, even if it forces them to falsify their actual developing understanding. We force them to give us a golden calf so we can grade it.
That is a striking, visceral analogy. And I agree completely that forcing premature articulation can deeply damage the learning process. But I have a rigorous functional objection to this entire concept of terminal trend alignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
If grammar is just a temporary crossing,
and we as educators or listeners are asked to sit in disciplined non-understanding while waiting for this profound meaning vector to eventually form. How do we practically distinguish between a profound truth struggling to be born and simple objective incoherence?
You look at the vector.
But if a student says something grammatically fractured, it might be a brilliant insight, or it might just be that they haven't done the reading and don't understand the material at all. Grammatical forms aren't just arbitrary decorations or temporary scaffolding that we can easily discard. They are the necessary structural rules that make complex thought possible to share.
He's not saying discard them.
But if you don't enforce the grammar, you don't just delay the meaning, you prevent the meaning from ever existing in a shared social space.
I really don't think Raman is suggesting that grammar doesn't matter or that incoherence is secretly genius. He explicitly states that truth is what language cannot comprehend until grammar connects terminal trend to terminal trend.
So he admits grammar is required.
The grammar is absolutely required to make the hidden relation visible to others. But his core point is that the alignment must be faithful to the deep meaning, not merely compliant with a disconnected institutional rule. We have to look at the pillars rising beneath the water, the intent, before we judge the surface of the bridge.
But doing that requires a level of epistemic patience from the listener that borders on the ascetic. I mean, it's exhausting, which leads us to the absolute pinnacle of his framework, and frankly, the part of the paper I find the most alarming and problematic.
The epistemology of negation, the concept that to know is to know, N-O.
Exactly.
It is the intellectual translation of the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith, La ilaha illa Allah, there is no God but God.
Right.
Raman argues that true knowledge is not a process of accumulation, it is a process of severance. In our age of information overload, we think that adding more data, opening more browser tabs, reading more books, and building more complex models gets us closer to truth.
And he says it doesn't.
Raman says it just builds false ultimacies. We must actively say no to our autonomous understanding. We must say no to the deification of our own concepts. We must actively slaughter the ego's logic. We must refuse to treat our provisional, measured reality as final.
It's a very destructive philosophy.
By aggressively clearing the room of these intellectual idols, we allow the absolute prior to stand without counterfeit competition.
Hold on, I have to stop you there. I understand the theological resonance here, and as apathetic theology, the ancient tradition of describing God by what God is not, it works beautifully. It's poetic.
It's more than poetry.
But using to know is to know as a daily, functional epistemology risks utter intellectual nihilism.
Nihilism, really?
Yes, if the highest form of human understanding is to perpetually slaughter our own definitions, to reside in this absolute zero of false ground where we constantly deny our own conceptual frameworks, how do we do anything?
You act from the posture of witnessing.
How do I cure a disease? If I'm an engineer building a suspension bridge, I cannot sit in a state of disciplined non-understanding about the tensile strength of steel.
He isn't saying you should...
Science, philosophy, ethics, human rights, they all require us to make affirmative claims. They require us to build. If we are constantly engaged in this extreme epistemic asceticism, taking an axe to every concept that forms in our minds, I seriously question whether this is actually merciful as Raman claims.
It is merciful.
I think it demands a psychological fracturing that ordinary humans cannot endure. We need some solid ground, even if we know it is provisional, just to walk forward. Are you saying we shouldn't trust our own eyes?
I hear that visceral frustration, and Raman anticipates exactly that fear. He addresses it by bringing in the concept of the knell of primordium.
The bell ringing?
The knell is not a descent into a black hole of nihilism where nothing matters and bridges collapse. It is merciful precisely because it announces that the era of endless, frantic speculation is over. A knell is a bell rung for a funeral.
Right.
The knell of primordium announces the death of the era of beginnings. We are no longer waiting for a new revelation, a new piece of data, or a new technological breakthrough to finally orient us morally.
Meaning what practically?
Meaning the present moment is not a waiting room, it is the bounded field of accountability. We don't need to invent new realities or frantically accumulate data to figure out the fundamental truth of the universe. The knell announces that reality is already disclosing itself, right now, in front of you.
It feels paralyzing.
It's liberating. We just need to stop obstructing the truth that is happening with our endless models and measurements. You can still build the bridge, but you don't worship the physics that allows the bridge to stand.
But abandoning the luxury to legitimize time, as Keith so densely puts it, and facing this perpetual absolute now of accountability is an unimaginably heavy burden.
True freedom often is a burden.
Most people live in what might be called the sleep of Rahim, finding comfort in daily routine, in future plans, in the gradual, comforting accumulation of knowledge and material security.
The sleep of mercy. Yeah.
By ringing this knell, by forcing the individual to face the absolute limits of their own I, while simultaneously demanding they stand utterly accountable in the perpetual present, Rahman is asking for a state of constant burning lucidity.
Yes, he is.
That isn't just a methodological shift for an applied linguist writing a paper. That is a demand for a total spiritual rewiring of the human species.
It is. It absolutely is. It is a demand to move from being what he calls the manouche, the generic social human just trying to survive the impermanence of the world, to the insan, the addressed being who recognizes that impermanence is actually a sign pointing directly to the source.
It's a tall order.
It's the only order that matters. To wrap up my position on this, Rahman's science Seams and Seams is a masterclass in intellectual and spiritual proportion. By relentlessly enforcing the epistemology of negation, it strips away the arrogance of the I and the idolatry of instrumental science.
Right.
It doesn't destroy science or language, it returns them to their proper, humble stations. It returns us from being frantic calculators to a state of true, accountable witnessing.
Well, I will certainly acknowledge the staggering beauty and the architectural rigor of Rahman's vision. It forces a mirror up to the academic, scientific, and technological communities that we desperately need to look into.
Absolutely.
However, I maintain my core caution. Fully adopting this processive simulacrum worldview, viewing our vital institutions primarily as layers of Hammer of Ham designed to blind us, and demanding that we exist as mere apertures in a state of disciplined non-understanding, it risks dissolving the very functional, pragmatic human agency required to act ethically and effectively within the material world. We are, for better or worse, creatures of the seams. We have to live in the measurements.
We are creatures of the seams, but his point is that we are sustained by the seamless. Engaging with the text this dense, this unapologetic, is transformative. Whether one accepts the premise of the absolute prior or not, Rahman undeniably exposes the frail, constructed nature of the protocols and measurements we take for absolute granted.
We thought we were looking at a clean, objective X-ray of reality, but he has shown us that the machine itself is warping the image.
He certainly breaks the machine, and he leaves us with the terrifying task of figuring out how to see the world without it.
Indeed.
Which leaves all of you with a final thought to ponder. As you navigate your own world of metrics, protocols, standardized tests, and daily language, ask yourself, is your quest for knowledge an act of endless accumulation, building modern idols out of data? Or are you willing to let it become an act of severance, clearing the room to see what actually remains? We'll leave it to you to decide.